as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. John Thompson emerged from his front door, ready to tackle another evening. A 38-year-old father of two and a dedicated software engineer, John had always taken pride in maintaining his home and being an active member of his community. He enjoyed his weekends tending to the garden, where vibrant flowers bloomed alongside neatly trimmed hedges. Family barbecues often filled the backyard with laughter, and evenings were typically spent unwinding on the couch with his wife, Sarah, watching their favorite shows. However, beneath this seemingly idyllic life lay an undercurrent of tension that had been brewing for weeks. The Homeowners Association, HOA, had recently tightened its grip on community regulations, introducing new fines for infractions that many residents deemed excessive. John found himself caught in this web when he received a $55 fine for an allegedly overdue yard maintenance issue, a claim he vehemently disputed. Despite his best efforts to communicate with the HOA board members, each interaction only added to his frustration. He believed the fine was unwarranted. After all, he had diligently cared for his lawn. Yet attempts to explain his position were met with bureaucratic indifference. The situation escalated quickly as he received notices threatening further penalties if immediate payment wasn't made. On that fateful day, John returned home from work to discover something was amiss. As he turned on lights and switched on appliances, nothing happened. It was eerily quiet. Confused and concerned, he stepped outside to check the circuit breaker, but found no issues there. That's when reality hit him. The HOA had cut off his electricity over the fine. Unbeknownst to John at that moment, a local TV news crew was nearby preparing for a live broadcast about community engagement. As they filmed outside John's house for an unrelated story, they inadvertently captured the moment when he discovered what had occurred. With cameras rolling, John's disbelief morphed into outrage as he grappled with the harsh reality of being punished over what seemed like an insignificant matter in a world filled with more pressing concerns. This incident would soon unravel into a spectacle that challenged not just one man's struggle, but also raised questions about homeowner rights versus HOA authority in communities nationwide. In many suburban communities, homeowners associations, HOAs, serve to maintain property values and ensure a cohesive aesthetic throughout the neighborhood. However, their regulations can sometimes overreach, becoming a source of frustration for residents who feel unfairly targeted. In John Thompson's case, the HOA had recently enacted stricter guidelines regarding property upkeep, which included hefty fines for those deemed non-compliant. The specific regulation that led to John's $55 fine detailed requirements for landscaping maintenance, stipulating that lawns must be kept free of weeds and have grass trimmed to a certain height. While John had consistently mowed his lawn and tended to his garden, the HOA cited him for an overdue yard maintenance infraction. Their claim was based on the detection of dandelions, an occasional presence in his otherwise well-kept yard, alongside grass that had grown slightly longer than the mandated height during a particularly rainy season. John had always prided himself on being a responsible homeowner, adhering to community standards while balancing family life and a demanding job. When he received the notice about the fine, he was taken aback. He made it a point to address any minor issues promptly. He reached out in good faith to the HOA board, providing photographic evidence of his yard's condition and explaining how the unpredictable weather had impacted his maintenance routine. However, rather than engaging with his concerns, the HOA maintained a rigid stance, dismissing his pleas and insisting on immediate payment. As tensions mounted, residents began to voice their frustrations about the HOA's increasingly draconian measures, claiming that they prioritized fines over fostering a sense of community. John felt isolated as his neighbors recounted similar experiences where minor infractions spiraled into major penalties. This arbitrary enforcement of rules fostered resentment among homeowners who believed they were deserving of better communication and understanding from the board. In an attempt to resolve the situation amicably, John prepared to challenge the fine during the upcoming HOA meeting, hoping that open dialogue could lead to a fair resolution. Little did he know that this confrontation would escalate dramatically, culminating in a shocking turn of events that would put his struggle in the spotlight. Determined to rectify the situation, John Thompson began his efforts to resolve the $55 fine with optimism. He meticulously gathered evidence, taking photographs of both his well-maintained yard and the few dandelions mentioned in the HOA's notice. He felt confident presenting this to the board during the next scheduled meeting, believing that a reasonable discussion would clarify his position. When that meeting arrived, John presented his case to the HOA board members. He explained how unpredictable weather had impacted daily life, making timely lawn care challenging for everyone in the area. He emphasized his commitment to maintain his property and pointed out that many of his neighbors faced similar minor infractions due to the variable growing conditions that spring. However, he was met not with understanding or sympathy, but with a cold reception. The board members cited their rules as unwavering, reiterating that enforcement must be consistent regardless of individual circumstances. Frustrated but not willing to give up, John followed up with a written appeal after the meeting. In it, he detailed his contributions to the community, from organizing neighborhood cleanup days to volunteering at local events, framing himself as a dedicated resident rather than just a homeowner who violated a small regulation. He believed this personal touch might humanize his appeal and persuade the board to reconsider their stance. Yet once again, John's heartfelt plea fell on deaf ears. The response he received was terse and dismissive. They reminded him that all homeowners were subject to the same regulations and that he should have been more vigilant about upkeep. This only fueled John's frustration further, as it seemed increasingly evident that the board was more focused on punishment than fostering community spirit. As days turned into weeks without any resolution, John felt isolated and powerless amidst escalating feelings of resentment toward an organization intended to support homeowners. Conversations with friends and neighbors revealed similar grievances. They too had experienced fines for minor issues. The collective discontent began brewing, with murmurs about banding together against what they perceived as a tyrannical HOA regime. John resolved to take a stand at the next HOA meeting, planning not just to address his own fine, but to advocate for a broader dialogue about fairness and community engagement. Little did he know this confrontation would thrust him into an unexpected spotlight, changing everything about how he viewed both his rights as a homeowner and the responsibilities of those in power within their community. The day began like any other for John Thompson, but beneath the surface simmered the tension from his ongoing battle with the Homeowners Association, HOA. After multiple attempts to resolve the $55 fine over yard maintenance, he hoped the situation would diffuse in time. Yet, unbeknownst to him, the HOA had decided to escalate matters. In a swift and surprising move, they had initiated action to cut off his electricity, a consequence of his failure to pay the overdue fine. As John returned home from work, he noticed an unusual stillness enveloping his house. The familiar hum of appliances was absent. Lights flickered but did not illuminate. An unsettling chill ran through him as he flipped switches and heard nothing in response. Confusion morphed into dread as he stepped outside, checking the circuit breaker for any faults. It was then that he spotted a letter pinned to his front door, a notice from the HOA informing him of their decision to disconnect his electricity until the fine was paid. The gravity of the situation sank in quickly, leaving John grappling with disbelief. How could it come to this? A fine for dandelions and slightly longer grass had escalated to a complete shutdown of essential services. He recalled recent conversations with neighbors who had voiced their frustrations about the HOA's authoritarian approach, but never did he think it would affect him so directly. What made this moment even more surreal was that a local TV news crew was on site, preparing for a broadcast about community engagement. As they set up their cameras outside John's home, they unwittingly captured the unfolding drama. With cameras rolling, John's initial shock turned into palpable outrage as he confronted the absurdity of being punished so harshly over a minor infraction in front of an audience. "Is this really how we treat our neighbors?" he exclaimed, gesturing toward the letter as emotions bubbled to the surface. The crew captured his words live, broadcasting them into homes throughout the area. John's voice echoed his community's growing frustrations with HOA policies that seemed draconian rather than supportive. What began as a personal struggle was now becoming a public spectacle, highlighting broader issues surrounding homeowner rights and HOA authority. As viewers tuned in, John felt both vulnerable and empowered. His plight resonated far beyond his own home. Little did he know that this moment would ignite a debate about fairness within his community, one that could change everything for residents facing similar battles against bureaucratic indifference. As John Thompson faced the shocking reality of his electricity being cut off, a local TV news crew was nearby, prepared to cover a different story altogether. The crew, led by veteran reporter Lisa Martinez, was focused on highlighting positive community initiatives, specifically a neighborhood block party aimed at fostering connections among residents. They had set up cameras in the area to capture interviews with families and local businesses contributing to the event. However, as they were finalizing their shots and gearing up for a lighthearted segment, the unexpected drama unfolding at John's residence quickly shifted their focus. A producer noticed the commotion outside as John reacted to the HOA's letter pinned to his door. Curious about the disturbance, Lisa and her team immediately turned their cameras toward the scene. They sensed an opportunity not just for compelling footage, but for a story that resonated deeply with community concerns. When the cameras rolled, viewers were introduced to John in a moment of raw emotion, grappling with his disbelief over the HOA's drastic measures. As he articulated his frustrations, questioning how such punitive actions could occur within a community meant to support its residents, Lisa recognized that this was no longer just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of broader issues facing homeowners everywhere. As she conducted impromptu interviews with John, capturing his outrage and vulnerability, the crew began to realize that they were witnessing a significant turning point in homeowner HOA relations. Lisa expertly guided the conversation, asking poignant questions that allowed John to express not only his feelings about the fine, but also his fears about losing community support from an organization that was supposed to promote harmony. The crew quickly pivoted their narrative, now aiming to spotlight John's story as part of a larger investigation into HOA practices. They began gathering perspectives from neighbors who had similarly faced harsh penalties for minor infractions. The juxtaposition of John's distress against the backdrop of the block party emphasized an unsettling truth. While some residents sought camaraderie and community spirit, others felt persecuted by bureaucratic systems meant to serve them. As John's narrative drew viewers' attention across town, it sparked conversations among homeowners about their rights and responsibilities within these associations. The live coverage turned what began as an ordinary news segment into a powerful exploration of justice and community engagement, one that would transform John's struggle into a rallying cry for homeowners everywhere. As the live broadcast continued, John Thompson stood outside his home, visibly shaken by the abrupt cutoff of his electricity. His heart raced, and his voice cracked with emotion as he confronted the situation, exclaiming, "This isn't just about a fine. It's about being treated fairly in our own homes." The array of cameras and lights captured not just his words, but the palpable anger and frustration etched on his face. Onlookers who had gathered in response to the unfolding drama watched in a mix of disbelief and empathy. Many were neighbors who had also faced similar issues with the Homeowners Association, HOA. Murmurs surged through the small crowd as they shared their own stories of fines and threats, fueling their collective outrage at what they perceived as an overreach of authority. "It's insane that they would go this far over such a trivial amount," one neighbor shouted, echoing sentiments felt by many. Meanwhile, representatives from the HOA were watching from a distance, uncomfortable with the public visibility of the situation. One board member, a middle-aged man named Charles, attempted to navigate the shifting momentum. He approached John cautiously, but was met with resistance as John's frustration boiled over. "You can't just come into our lives and dictate how we live. This isn't how community is supposed to work," John yelled, gesturing emphatically. Charles tried to maintain a calm demeanor, but but struggled under the pressure of both John's emotional outburst and the attention of a news crew. "We have rules for a reason," he replied hastily, though his words lacked conviction against the backdrop of mounting public dissent. The presence of cameras only heightened tensions. He realized that their actions could lead to increased scrutiny of HOA practices. The viewers at home were captivated by this confrontation, with many taking to social media to express their thoughts. Some voiced support for John, while others debated whether the HOA was justified in enforcing its regulations. The ripple effect began to spread throughout the community as more people tuned in to witness this unexpected clash. John's impassioned plea struck a chord not only with those physically present, but also with countless viewers who saw themselves mirrored in his struggle. In that moment, he became a reluctant spokesperson for residents fighting against rigid HOA policies. As he continued speaking out during the broadcast, it became clear that this incident was more than just one man's battle. It had ignited a larger conversation about rights and responsibilities within their community, prompting reflection on what true neighborly support should look like. In the hours following the live broadcast, John Thompson's emotional confrontation with the Homeowners Association, HOA, sparked a wave of public response that rippled across social media platforms. Hashtags such as hashtag HOA overreach and hashtag Justice for John began trending as viewers expressed their outrage and solidarity with John's plight. For many, his struggle resonated deeply, reflecting frustrations they had silently endured regarding similar issues with their own HOAs. Comments flooded in from community members both near and far, sharing their experiences of facing fines for trivial infractions or navigating inflexible regulations enforced by faceless boards. One user tweeted, "If they can cut off someone's electricity over $55, what's next?" highlighting a fear among many that they too could be unjustly penalized. Others praised John for bravely standing up against what they described as tyrannical oversight, calling him a hero and rallying around his cause. Local discussions were also ignited in nearby communities. Neighbors who had previously felt isolated began banding together to voice their collective frustrations. Many converged online to organize meetings where they would share their experiences and strategize how to confront their respective HOAs about harsh enforcement policies. The situation rapidly transformed from a single homeowner's battle into a broader movement advocating for homeowner rights and fair treatment. News outlets quickly picked up the story beyond local broadcasts, further amplifying John's message. Interviews from various homeownership groups began circulating, calling for greater transparency and reform within HOAs. Residents were encouraged to speak out against misguided practices that turned neighborly relationships into transactional conflicts fueled by rigid adherence to rules. Meanwhile, the reaction in John's own neighborhood was equally significant. Some neighbors expressed newfound solidarity in person at block gatherings after witnessing the live coverage. As they shared stories over coffee or during evening strolls, they began discussing organizing a petition aimed directly at the HOA board, demanding reforms in policy enforcement and community engagement. The public's fervor continued to escalate, leading to local news stations planning follow-up reports on John's story. Particularly intrigued by how this incident had transformed him from an ordinary homeowner into an emblem of resistance against unreasonable governance. Each social media post further fueled conversations about fairness within communities and prompted an awakening among residents fed up with being marginalized by authoritative housing regulations. Ultimately, John's impromptu activation of community support due to unfortunate circumstances highlighted a critical turning point in neighborhoods usually regarded as homogeneous enclaves managed solely by authority rather than affection among neighbors. The unexpected escalation raised awareness about shared struggles against strict regulation and inspired fresh dialogue surrounding homeowner rights nationwide. The cutoff of John Thompson's electricity by the Homeowners Association, HOA, raises significant legal implications that warrant careful examination. Homeowners associations typically operate under the authority granted to them by governing documents, such as covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and RS. of the community. While these documents outline rules and regulations for homeowners, they also set boundaries on the actions HOA boards can take against residents. One primary legal consideration is whether the HOA's decision to cut off essential services like electricity constitutes an overreach of its authority. Most state laws provide protections against punitive measures that could jeopardize a resident's health or safety. Cutting off electricity can be seen as a form of self-help remedy, which is generally frowned upon in legal contexts. Courts often hold that severe consequences, such as utility shutoffs, must follow appropriate legal processes instead of unilateral actions taken by an HOA. Additionally, homeowners have a right to due process when facing penalties from their association. This means they should receive proper notice and an opportunity to contest any disputes before severe actions are implemented. In John's case, cutting off his electricity without allowing him to appear before the board to defend against the fine undermines